Welcome to another episode of Management Muse. I'm your host, Cindi Baldi, and this is my husband and co-host, Geoffrey Tumlin.
Yellow! Welcome to the podcast where we try to inspire better work performance. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Management Muse. I'm your host, Cindi Baldi, and my co-host is the wonderful Geoffrey Tumlin.
Yellow.
And today we are going to be talking about a concept that in the science is called peak end effect, although one never knows what this actual episode will be titled. It will emerge. So I'm not putting a bet or my thumb on what it will actually be. And before we get rolling, I do want to take one quick moment and just say that if you enjoy these episodes, we would appreciate you following, subscribing, starring, liking, sharing, whatever you feel like you want to do. That would be great.
Yep.
All right, on to the topic.
My favorite example of the peak end effect is a long time ago before colonoscopies, which is where you get a basically camera
up your rear end.
Yep, camera in the rear end. Before that was done with the anesthesia where you forget. And so if you haven't had one and you're over whatever the age is, 45 now, I guess, definitely we're pro colonoscopy. But back in the day, you would feel that. And so you feel the instrument, in your colon, you feel it moving around. And so they did an experiment. The lead author was Daniel Rettelmeyer of the University of Toronto. And the second author was Daniel Kahneman, who we talk about at some length.
I think he's deceased now, but
Yep.
he's done amazing work that changed the way we understand people and their behavior.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we wind up talking about him a lot.
Yeah, he's probably in the last 30 years or 20 years, at least, the most influential psychologist in the world. Wouldn't be how I would describe him.
Yeah, I think that's probably true.
Yep. And this study that he did along with, I think it's Donald Rettelmeyer, we'll put a link in the show notes, was they asked the doctors performing the colonoscopy to do it however they normally do the procedure. And then in half of the cases for the doctors, they asked them, leave the instrument inserted in the colon for the last 30 seconds and then just let go of it. Don't move it. And so, in other words, in half of the cases, the colonoscopies were 30 seconds longer that the person was on the table and the instrument was still in the colon, but there was nothing moving. And what was noteworthy about this experiment is that even though in that condition of the experiment, those participants were subject to a longer colonoscopy, and so more cumulative discomfort because you still, have a camera, inside of you back before the days where the anesthesia made you forget it all. People years later, when it was time to get their next colonoscopy, were far more likely to get it if they were in the condition where the procedure was longer, but the end had that 30 seconds of nothingness, of the instrument just sitting there. And so this is, extremely counterintuitive that people would
choose the longer.
That's right.
Basically. Or that they would be
more positively disposed.
Right, to going again after having the longer one.
That's right.
And clarify why that 30 seconds mattered.
Because our brain makes a deal with us. It says, I'm going to let you experience everything in life that happens to you. And so in a colonoscopy, where you're not under anesthesia, like these people were not, you're going to experience it all. You're going to experience the moment you meet the doctor. You're going to experience the moment it's put inside of your colon. You're going to experience the first time it hits the lining of the colon and makes the turn. You're going to experience all of that. But as soon as it's over, because the brain is limited, the brain says the deal is I have to start forgetting virtually everything that happened because we have to make space for all the next stuff that's going to happen. And just in case we need to remember any of this, we're going to hang on to a few snapshots in time so that if we have to think about this experience and make an assessment or determination about it later, we'll have some data points. And so what the brain holds after for memories disproportionately is, was it good or bad? Technically, was the highest high greater than the lowest low? Was the best part of the colonoscopy better than the worst part was bad? That's piece one. And piece two is...
Which that's peak. That's
peak. That's either the peak
or the valley.
Yeah, peak or valley. And then part two is, how did it end? Because it made sense, again, think evolution, for the brain to kind of configure itself this way over time of, I need to know that berry looks pretty and I eat it and I feel fine for 30 minutes. But in the 45th minute, if my stomach hurts and then I have diarrhea for 3 hours, I need to know how it ended. It ended with diarrhea, even though it looked pretty, it tasted good, and I felt good for a while. I need to know how it ended. And so I need to know both, is it good or bad? And then how did it end? In the instance of the berry, we would then remember that berry actually is bad. That I felt
everything
so
else gets stripped away.
That's
and
right.
all you have is
That's right.
the peak and then the end.
Yeah. And so then you piece it together. The next time you see the berry, you look and you're like, wait, I remember this thing. And you get those two data points, boom, boom. I mean, this all happened fast. We're describing, a little bit linearly the way the brain works. But basically the brain says, you've seen that berry, boom, here's what you know about it. It actually made you feel terrible, and then it ended in diarrhea. Don't eat that.
Interestingly enough, like we know people who going in to eat a meal know they're going to feel terrible at the end, but the pleasure is so great in the meal that that actually wins. Like the peak is so great that drives them going to, and like you will hear them talking while going to the meal that they're going to get, some revenge. The chef is going to get his revenge on you.
Yeah.
And that's like part of the whole experience, but the whole experience is considered positive because they're looking forward to that food to that degree.
Yeah. It's a good example. And so now let me put all of those examples that we've populated so far together. The berry that our ancestors saw, the meal that has great memory but hurts you later, and then the colonoscopy, and why did people come back more often if they had the longer one? And so you have to fast forward then in the colonoscopy experiment. You have the experiment, you experience everything with the experiencing part of yourself. And so, famously Kahneman talks about, there's the experiencing part of you that eats the berry and was there for all that. And then there's the experiencing part of you that had the colonoscopy. Then there's the experiencing part of you that went to that restaurant. And so you actually were there experiencing every moment. And then you began forgetting almost all of it, except for, a couple of these key data points like we're talking about in the peak end effect here. And so fast forward 4 years, let's say, or whatever, multiple years pass in this colonoscopy experiment before the people are contacted. And so they get contacted by their doctor. Hey, it's time for your next colonoscopy. Will you make an appointment? And then they remember peak, or was it a high or a low? Was it good or bad? Well, they remember, it's bad. They were awake during the thing. So anybody in a colonoscopy where you're awake from it, it's not going to be happy. It's going to be bad. And so the low is going to be lower than the high. There's going to be a time when it hits against the intestine, it's doesn't feel good going in, whatever. And so you're going to remember that that's the low, but then the end, if the instrument was inserted but not moving, that's relatively better. And so those people had a different memory than the people who the ending wasn't coming out, boom, it comes out, right? It's dragging around and hit the last thing, ouch, that hurts, it comes out. And so those people, the valley was actually low and the end was bad. So they had thumbs down. Whereas the people who had the instrument in them at the end for 30 seconds, they had a low because the valley
it's a camera.
Yeah. And the end was comparatively peaky. So it was a little better. And so that experience wasn't as bad. And so that caused them to be more likely to get their next colonoscopy on time. That mixed thumb signal is what you're describing from a meal. The person you're describing still eats the meal, even though they know it's going to hurt them later. They're describing, I still remember this meal as being better. The good parts were better than the bad parts were bad. How did it end? It ended with an upset stomach. That's the same bittersweet that is kind of a mixed recollection. And so this is a long explanation to say why we're devoting a podcast to this. And there's a few reasons, but one of the main reasons is we absolutely do not remember things accurately. Completely accurately is a way of saying it. We remember things as an approximation, a small number of data points that we remember, and then we put a story together that is reasonably accurate, but not completely so. And so that colonoscopy experiment, people remembered the end being a little better than everything else, and they were more likely to go back. Your friend who went to a restaurant where they had been hurt before, or they knew that it was going to be a punishing end, so to speak, they remembered that, but they also remembered that some of the times at the table was great camaraderie, the best food they've had, whatever else. And that's more of a mixed memory where it's not as clean to say that's good, that's great on the one hand, or that's terrible, that's horrible on the other hand. We think a lot then about these kind of mixed cases. It's sometimes fun to think about movies or TV shows. Game of Thrones brought people hours and hours and hours of happiness and great entertainment, and then people got upset that the last couple episodes were bad. And so when people talk about Game of Thrones, they say, yeah, but it was great, but. And that doesn't do justice really to it.
When you think about duration, they're actually, we usually think in terms of like building a bank, right? Like good memories, building a bank of goodwill, good memories.
Yep.
But actually, like for a lot of experiences, the way that we're remembering them, like the duration doesn't matter.
Yep.
Because you're only going to take a few pieces.
That's
and
right.
It's going to have sort of the same
Yeah.
weight. Like Game of Thrones was years and years and years of fantastic
top of the memory, top of the charts.
Episodes.
Yeah.
And you're going to remember that about the same way as a TV show that was a year.
A 30-minute sitcom.
That was great.
That's right.
For that year, that season, and had a bad ending. Like they're going to basically get weighted pretty much the same.
Yeah. Yes. That is vitally important. It's called duration neglect in this body of research, but it is exactly as Cindi says, that we don't give credit to how long something was. Or we don't give the appropriate credit.
We don't give the appropriate weight.
The appropriate weight.
Because if you were going to do weight, if there was going to be a weight to Game of Thrones, it would be, this much pleasure time.
That's right.
Times years.
That's right.
Minus disappointing end.
Yes.
And that's not how it goes.
No.
It's just, here are these moments, here are these peaks,
Yes.
and they were highly positive, and then here's this end, and it was, disappointing. And
Yes.
you're going to sort of
Put the story together based
on that, and it's going to be a little bit bittersweet.
Yeah. I'm glad we're talking about this because this actually matters a great deal, and it's things people don't think about a lot. The part of me, what Kahneman calls the experiencing self, that person actually is the junior partner in my life. The main driver, the boss of me,
Is the remembering self.
is the remembering me. Even though the experiencing me actually experienced all 200 hours of Game of Thrones.
Whatever it was, a
Whatever
lot of hours.
Let's say it was 200 hours. The experiencing me experienced all 200, but as soon as each one was over, I began forgetting almost everything. And then all the power transferred to the remembering me. And it's the remembering me today that when somebody asks about Games of Thrones says, it was good. I can't believe how the ending was. When, as you point out, what I should be saying is that gave me 200 hours of happiness. And I shouldn't even mention the 90 minutes that were off, because in the grand scope, it shouldn't have as much weight. We talk about this a lot now. My dad is in the beginning of the late stages of Alzheimer's, and he's had it for 5 years now? He's probably had it for...
But it was noticeable for about 5 years.
At some point, my dad is going to pass away, and everybody's going to get together, and we're going to talk and have a memorial. And the tendency, the urge is for people to remember the Alzheimer's.
The end.
The end. Even though my dad's cumulative life, and my dad's had a great life, an amazing life, but a disproportionate amount of that, unless we walk back, and this is what this is for. Like, the reason we're talking about this is because one day my dad won't be here, and I'll be remembering my dad, and I need to tell myself, ease off the Alzheimer's memories, ease up on the Alzheimer's story. Don't let it be such a,
defining.
Yes.
Yeah.
So when you think about the peak end effect, your basic peak end, then, the way that you remember, you have the experiencing self that experiences everything. But then as soon as the event is over, basically all the power transfers to the remembering self. These are terms from Daniel Kahneman in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And so that presents basically a 2x2 matrix. And so either the peak was higher than the valley was low, and so you either get an up or a down, so you're either the top or the bottom.
Give it a number so that's clear. Like the peak on a 1 to 10 scale.
Sure. It's like
peak,
a movie.
Right.
Think about the last movie you watched.
So maybe the best moment in that movie was actually a 10. And the
worst was a -6.
Right.
Yeah.
It's pretty bad, but not as bad as the high was high.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you're going to remember that generally positively. And then the end, however that ends, matters.
Yes.
Hello, musers. Now it's time for commercial break.
Training should be fun and educational. It should be able to be meaningful, but hold people's attention. Our training covers virtually any management topic that you've heard. Some of our most popular: conflict resolution, motivation, delegation and supervision, strategic planning, strategic thinking, executive decision making. We spend a great deal of time taking our content, making it immediately usable and fun. We also teach a lot of communication topics because of our background in communication, negotiation, dispute resolution, communicating with difficult people, having difficult conversations. If you want training that's fun, accessible, and scientific without bogging itself down, we're your huckleberry. Call us at ondemandleadership.com. You can look us up or give us a call or send an email. ondemandleadership.com. ondemandleadership.com. Do not sit through crappy training for your people. Training can be fun, but we have a good time. A lot of laughter, a lot of learning. As one of our mentors once told us, nobody ever learned if they were sleeping.
We only talked about mixed, and so we should talk about the straight, where the peak and the end are both high, or the valley and the end are low.
Yeah, you think of them. I mean, again, we use movies because they're convenient. Virtually all the Mission Impossible movies were, to me, high. They have great endings, and there's some amazing action and so forth. And so that's, a lot of that is a high, and there's a little bit of laughter throughout there. And so I think a lot of those I would describe as high. And so then, that's why, like with many people in America, we're going to be there when that movie opens up.
And we are going to be there.
We look back and we think about it and we're like, okay, that was like, the action was great. High is better than the low is low, good. And then good ending.
Yeah, the ending is always great.
Yeah, I don't remember a bad ending. Whereas most movies, if they had a bad ending, we remember that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a high. And then there's low.
Well, low, I think we can go with divorce.
Okay. Give me your divorce
most
example.
People don't have a very happy, fun divorce. There are some exceptions, but you have potentially decades of good memories with somebody.
Yeah.
And, have kids, which I would think that those would be moments of extreme joy,
Sure.
all the things that life brings. You have a lot of highs, and it goes on for a long time. And then however long it takes for one of you to make the decision to leave, whatever that is, that's usually a very small fraction of the time that was good.
Yeah.
And yet it's so bad, and it's the end, that you wind up rewriting the whole thing and feeling like the whole thing was a failure and the whole thing was a mistake and the person is awful.
Yeah. And we talk to people who've had that happen, basically a divorce, and it's exactly like Cindi said. And the countermeasure for this is to get people to recognize the duration, to not have the duration neglect. How many good years? Yes, your marriage is blowing up. It's been 15 years. How many of those were good? Well, 13 and a half. Okay. Then don't say this whole thing was terrible. Or it's more than say. It's
that it's impacting them and how they make their belief in themselves to make decisions going forward.
Yes. And your brain is not serving it up accurately because of this bias. And it's making us feel a way that we're feeling it, but it's not actually accurate. Meaning, basically, to be blunt, we shouldn't be feeling it. We're feeling something for real, but it's inaccurate. Same way of, we work with companies that go through traumatic times, and occasionally they have to lay people off. And the people who are laid off, their memories will be, you ask them, well, how was it there? And like, well, it was a bad ending. And, they should have been smarter about their money or whatever. And it colors. You're like, well, look, how long did you work there? 8 years. And why did you start? Well, I believed in the work. And how long was it good? Like 7 years and 364 days. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it was a good run. Just the last part was bad. And that's not properly accounting for the full nature of the experience. Same thing with, this is one of the reasons why you and I talk so much about the bias in doing performance reviews that only happen once a year. Is that it's performance review time. It's December. Okay, well, what happened, 10 days ago?
Well, yeah, because you've got the recency effect, and that is technically
An end.
end.
That's right.
And so, that, first of all, are memories, unless like you are jotting these moments down, good and bad, along the way, your memory is only going to remember the recent stuff. And then it is an end, and so it has an outsized impact on how you perceive the employee.
Yeah.
Which is why, as an employee, you need to help do things to basically remind them that there was an entire year of things that happened.
Yeah. It's not allowing the overweighting of the last events if you feel like those aren't representative, that it's skewing it in one way or the other. It can skew it the other way. This famous Seinfeld episode of George Costanza always, when he had something funny to say that everybody laughed at, walking out of the room to end on a high note, right? Right? You don't remember that one?
I don't remember that one. But that sounds like George Costanza.
Yeah, they were talking about, the kind of ending on a high note, this and that. And so he would just, whenever he made people laugh, he'd just get up and walk out of the meeting. It's the mic drop, right? That's kind of ending on a high, trying to end on a high note so that locks in that one data point for the remembering self.
We had somebody we were working with in an organization. He'd been there for a while.
Yeah.
Like counting in the years. And everybody loved him. The leadership loved him. His peers loved him. He was always there to help. He was creative in the ways that he handled things. He was calm. He was kind. He was smart. And so, generally well thought of as a great employee. But there was no room for him to move up. And he definitely wasn't going to hang around and wait any little bit longer than he needed to, partly because he knew he was a great employee.
Yeah.
And so he wound up getting another job, and in how he did it, he harmed his relationships with all the people who were above him.
In how he told them goodbye.
Yeah. And so that was their ending.
Yeah.
And almost immediately the whole story flipped to the point where it was painful to be in meetings where it was mentioned and hear how he was discussed, because as an observer, I'm sitting there going, he did so much.
Duration neglect. The guy had many, 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 many good months, and then he just mishandled the ending. And it threw off the story. And that's how people remember the guy. You bring him up, and it's a yeah, but, like Game of Thrones. And that's not accurate. Probably that place wouldn't hire the guy back, and that would be an organizational mistake. A misremembering of what the actual experience was of having the guy there as an employee, in the transfer of fragments of that memory to the remembering self. Too much of the story got lost. And so you have to really take a painstaking approach to your endings. I mean, when we began to first fully absorb the implications of how much the ending matters to our memory formation and how much it goes to our evaluation of things in the past, mean, I think it's fair to say it changed a lot of the work that you and I do when we gather groups. And so
definitely.
Yeah. We always try to have a good ending because that's going to be the part that people hold on to until there's a next time.
Or at least it's one of the pieces that they hold on to.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we're certainly
it's
like
hard
everyone.
It's hard to predict where the peak or the valley might be, but you know when the ending is going to be. And so you definitely need to make sure that you're nailing that down on the positive.
Yeah. To the best of your ability. The ending can hurt you more if people don't know you quite as much. Because then there's this idea of a kind of a goodwill balance that builds up where people give you the benefit of the doubt.
I think the right analogy is Game of Thrones. So
Okay.
if Game of Thrones had only been the last episode, there, I'm assuming that people would think that there were highs in just that last episode, but the ending in total was so bad that like you probably would just think, in many people's opinion, I think that would have just been marked as, oh, that was bad.
Yeah.
But you're actually have like moments from across all the episodes. You don't have one necessarily for each episode, but you've got like a handful of peaks from across multiple episodes. And then you've got this bad ending.
Yeah.
And so then you get like this mixed result.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that. I had one of the famous examples of more recent of peak end effect is I think it was Blockbuster or somewhere, a video store. And they gave people in condition one of the experiment.
It was Blockbuster.
A free week of anything they want in Blockbuster. And then for half of the people, they gave them a second week of only a select number of the titles, but they were all movies that people tended not to rent. In other words, they were the movies that weren't as great, right?
Yes.
There were no new releases. There was no classic Forrest Gump kind of stuff. And so what happened then is after that experiment was over, you have group one got 1 week of free movies of anything they wanted. Group two got that same first week. And then they got a second week where they could basically rent movies that weren't quite as good, but it's still free, right? So they got 2 free weeks. This group got 1 free week. But the people who overwhelmingly preferred this reward were the people who got only 1 free week. Again, duration neglect. It doesn't matter that the other group got the same 1 free week and another whole bonus week after. What mattered is peak end. The first group remembered good, and the group that got 2 weeks remembered good, bad. And so the first group actually preferred it. And it's been a couple years now, but I was at a gig and the gig ended on a high note. And it was, I did my part and there was laughter and blah, blah. And it was, we had a good time and it was a good ending. And then they were like, okay, that's it. Thanks, Geoff, this and that. And then basically they teed up what was coming in the next block. They were going to do themselves. And it was basically they needed to have a challenging conversation. And I was feeling good. And so at the break, I asked the person who invited me, I'm like, look, it's only another hour. I don't mind. I'm already here. Do you want me to facilitate this conversation for you? And they're like, oh, that would be great. And I'm thinking, hey, it's cool. This is me being a nice guy. I'm already here. I'll help them out. This is something we do all the time. But basically, we went from having fun for 4 hours. And then I stayed for the 5th hour, which I didn't have to stay for, and facilitated a hard conversation and screwed up my ending.
Yeah.
Don't do that, right? Like if you can
have the hard conversation first if you're going to do it, but ideally, like maybe you have that separately.
Well, depending on what you're trying to accomplish, right?
Right.
Like for me, I never see them. I see them once a year. And so it's very important for the one time I'm there for it to have a good ending. For the boss of that company, if the most important thing in that day was that difficult conversation, you want to schedule that whenever it's most likely to be effective. Now, it happens to be that's usually going to be early, but it was a mistake out of having a big heart, but I completely stepped on a good ending. And that's crazy. Don't do that. And then for the things that you're evaluating negatively, ask yourself, cumulatively, is it as bad as I'm making it out to be? This employee that I'm upset with, am I upset with them because they did something last week that's still on my mind because it's kind of like the ending, the last thing I'm holding on to? Also, the recency, like you said, is part of it. Part of that. And is that discounting the fact that they've had basically the last 6 months has been good, solid performance?
I just would have to add to that I do think people, you forget very fast. And so to really be able to evaluate your employees' work, you really have to actually be taking some periodic notes on this stuff. Because if you think back, even on some of these movies that we mentioned, you only remember the peak/valleys and the ending. Most of the other details go right away.
Yeah.
And that happens very quick. But just coming out and trying to think back in time, no, it's not there. And that's what you're doing to your employees. And so you have to have a system where you're recording some of these moments.
Yeah.
And then you have to, when it comes to
Enforce.
evaluation time, you go back and you look at those notes, because then you'll remember, the stuff is there, but you're not going to remember unless you put some notes down on the thing with enough description to actually trigger a memory.
Yeah. Yeah. And you have to force yourself to try to do your best to fill in the story based on those notes, because you get the 2 data points, but then you try to put the rest of it together and you're like, okay, all right. And we would actually try to evaluate as much of it as we could. It boggles my mind that some restaurants we go to treat dessert like a throwaway. When for
it's
many,
your end.
Yeah. For whatever percent, I don't know the percentage, but a non-trivial percent of people end their meal with dessert and coffee.
Especially if it's a special place.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. You can't just have a great entree and then bring out something that isn't up to that level. The endings overwhelmingly matter. We discount the duration, and we basically give virtually no authority to the part of us that actually experienced the event. All of the authority, the decision-making authority, goes to the part of us that remembers it. And we don't remember accurately. And we have to try to walk that back so that we know to a more precise nature, well, how did our employee do last year? And how happy are we with this vendor? And how enjoyable was that vacation? It applies to everything that you've experienced and now you're looking back on and remember, but it applies to vacations. You and I, ever since we've known about this, we've always planned our vacation to have the best night at the end. Again, another point that's worth commenting on, it's kind of embedded in this, is if your beginning is off to a rocky start,
remember that you have an opportunity with the end. And I think that's really handy in things like interviews or presentations.
Sure.
You got to kind of psychologically hold it together and try to nail your ending.
Yeah.
You got to be a gymnast and stick the ending.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes you have to work a little harder because you got off on a little shaky footing, right? And you can recover. You can recover from the impact of a shaky start, if your middle is better than your start, that peak will displace the lower shaky valley at the start. But it's very hard to recover from a bad ending.
Again,
Yeah.
we know that it's not always easy
Yeah.
to know what will be somebody's peak or somebody's valley. Sometimes
Sure.
you hit something with a particular individual and they have a reaction
Sticks.
that you
Yeah.
just don't know,
Yeah.
can't predict, but you do know that the ending is going to matter.
Yeah.
All right. If you're watching this on YouTube, we appreciate some comments and definitely a thumbs up. If you're listening to this on any of the podcast type platforms, usually it's a star or like we'd be like 5 of them. That would be the optimal. And subscription helps. Following. We really do appreciate it if you can do that for us. We'll still be here either way, but we do appreciate it. And we want to say thank you to Sarah, Christina, and Rebecca, because they're the people who are behind the scenes making this thing happen. Thank you, everybody. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to learn more about the topic, check out our show notes. And if you want to help us out, like, share, subscribe, and 5 stars are all deeply appreciated. See you next time on The Management Muse.